Today's guest on A Life and a Living is a fascinating individual, and I'm really looking forward to talking to him. He's Carlos Valdes Dapena, who is the managing partner of an organization called Corporate Collaboration Resources, which is all about working with high-performing teams and really helping teams to become high-performing. He's fascinating, really interesting background. He's spent 17 years on Mars in the organization, doing various different work, but it's always been around teams, about team effectiveness and team dynamics. And he's written a couple of books. One is The Lessons from Mars, another is about working in the virtual world. But we really cover quite a lot of topics because I did keep Carlos longer than I promised. So my apologies to Carlos for actually doing that. But we actually talk about, what it actually means about team collaboration and the importance of the individual motivation, because Carlos does come very much from the starting point as you've got to get the individual motivation right first. And you've got to understand how that then meshes into team collaboration. But we also talk about the culture. We talk about the mistakes that organizations make in terms of trying to, investing money not very wisely in team effectiveness. So we go through some of that. But we also talk about that, as I say, the culture of collaboration. Because one is about the process of collaboration, the other part is about the culture of collaboration and how you actually really make that happen. So I really, really recommend to sit back and enjoy. Carlos is a really interesting man. He's got a bucket of experience and that shines through, and he's an expert in this topic. So sit back and enjoy the interview with Carlos Valdes Dapena. Carlos, thank you so much indeed for joining us here today. It's a real pleasure to have you here on A Life and a Living.
John, I'm thrilled to be with you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So I want to talk a bit about your background. I mean, you're managing partner of Corporate Collaboration Resources, which is a great name, but it's all about high performance collaboration in teams, which is really kind of speaking to the topic that I love. But, without kind of going too much detail, but you spent 17 years on Mars where, you worked with, such well-known brands like M&M, Snickers, Uncle Ben's, Rice, and others, but always in that space of kind of team building and team effectiveness. You're the author of two books I know of anyway, is Lessons from Mars and Resilience, which virtual teams holding the center when you can't meet face to face. Boy, how topical is that right now? So those two books. But the research that you've done focus on all the things that make teams more effective. But I thought one of the interesting things that you say very early on is that one of your findings points to individual motivation is the key to collaboration effectiveness. That's kind of not the normal place where people start when they start talking about teams. So just interested to explore that. I'm curious about it.
Well, John, it comes from this inquiry I did at Mars, trying to figure out why the conventional approaches to team building we'd been doing weren't really producing any changes that people could attribute to the work. In other words, it wasn't effective. This team building stuff that was happening. And like a lot of big companies, Mars spent a lot of money on, we'll call it generically team building, using what I call the conventional methodology. So for example, the consultancy Mars used in many instances, especially at senior levels, used the Tuckman model of the 4 stages of team development. They're very familiar to many people: forming, storming, norming, performing. Right? So I did. When I was asked as an internal org effectiveness guy to focus on teams for a few years, I adopted what we were using. It seemed like the smart thing to do. After all, I was living within a company that had an accepted way of operating in lots of ways, so why not in this way? And I guess I was into this a year and a half or so, and I teams were having me back a second and third time, and what impressed me most was how little progress they'd made. Right? I wasn't seeing any shifts in behavior, but also in some cases their business performance had diminished rather than improved or stayed the same. But anyway, I said, what's up with that? What is going on there? And fortunately at that moment, Mars University, the learning and education part of Mars, asked me if I wouldn't design one of three modules that would be the foundation of our leadership development efforts and make this on teams and team effectiveness. And I thought, great request. Unfortunately, everything I know proves to be pretty ineffective. So I was excited on the one hand, and on the other hand, I was panicked. I said, it's not working. So I used it as an opportunity to find out why. And a very smart colleague of mine said, you should, this hadn't occurred to me actually. She said, you've worked with how many teams now? I said, I don't know, in the last year and a half, 100 plus. She said, you've got a lot of data. You're always gathering data on teams. You use surveys and you do interviews. I said, yeah, I got all that. She said, look at it. Maybe it'll tell you something. And so I was somewhat skeptical of her suggestion, but I said, sure, I'll do it. And I spent several weeks pulling together all these interviews, theming out all the interviews, looking at all the survey data. I selected a subset of about 30 teams with global diversity, some diversity in functions. And I really didn't think I'd find anything. But when I did, I was gratified and I was a little shocked because it was the barrier I discovered I didn't expect. And the barrier was the incredibly talented and driven individuals Mars hired to do their jobs. So like any company, Mars took these incredibly driven and talented individuals and assembled them into teams. But what I found was that they were so driven, so motivated to achieve and to drive results, and they were so smart, they did that by themselves quite well, thank you very much. They didn't need a lot of collaboration or teamwork to get to be, and I'll use some language I've seen at your website, high-performing individuals.
Yeah.
So high-performing individuals were not coalescing into teams because they were so motivated. Look, they were hired as individuals. They were paid as individuals, recognized and promoted as individuals. Why wouldn't they default to that way of working? So teamwork was this vague notion of let's all be together and be helpful when we need to. But the real work was happening because very hardworking, very dedicated people were heads down and doing it. If they needed help, they would reach out. So there was not a complete lack of collaboration. But collaboration was an under-leveraged way of getting things done. People were very casual. What I say is they were unintentional about it. They would just talk team, but they didn't really know how to do team. So it was, and while I was at IBM, so I have to bring in another piece of context here. The coaching model we used at IBM, I was an internal executive coach for a subset of the top 35 global leaders. But the model we used came from the Hay McBurr company, and it was based on a guy named McClellan's work around motives. Mm-hmm. A lot of other models for motivation, and you can pick the model you want. This is the one they used. But he talked about three motives: achievement, affiliation, and power, as being essential to good leadership and good management. And what I was seeing in his language, in McClellan's language, was a high achievement drive was what was underneath most of the failure to collaborate. People liked their work. They liked getting stuff done. They liked getting credit for it. They liked to be able to tick things off the list. And when you shift to team, things can get fuzzy. Accountability becomes less clear. It just feels kind of messy. And let's face it, collaboration takes more time, more energy, prone to conflict, prone to miscommunication, therefore confusion. So if I can get it done myself and it's innately satisfying to me, it satisfies a deep motive that I have to achieve, I'm going to do that. So I was up against this achievement motive. That's really what we realized. But the trick was a little bit of a mind hack. And I know I've been going on for a while, John.
It's really interesting.
The way I framed the challenge to my team was, how can we make collaboration feel like just one more thing to be achieved? So rather than have it working against us, can we, as my friends down in Australia like to say, can we execute a little mind hack here? Right? And tap into that achievement drive, but direct it towards productive collaboration.
Yeah, two things, and I want to come back and explore that. I mean, two things that just struck me when you're talking about it there is that one of the things that I find is that sometimes people that you refer to a group as a team when it's actually not a team. right? Because they don't
Okay.
need to be a team. They just need to be a group of individuals, right?
Right.
So it's actually making sure that you're not trying to you make a group into a team that it doesn't need to be a team, right? So I think that definition is really important. The second thing, just coming back to when you're talking about the high performing individuals, I mean, you talk about the achievement, the affiliation, and the power. Okay,
Mhm.
they can satisfy the achievement, but they're not actually going to get the affiliation, or they're not going to get the real power if they don't leverage each other. So,
Well, yeah, I should probably define those a little more
okay,
clearly, because also imagine all of us go out and do this exercise that gives you your motives profile. There are these three bars on a chart: achievement, affiliation, power. They are not balanced against one or the other. So you can be high in all three. You can be high in two, low in one, low in two, high in one. It doesn't matter. So it's not like introversion, extroversion, where you're
right,
somewhere along the scale, right? They are independent of each other. Power is a deep-seated, outside your consciousness need for influence and authority. That's what they mean by power. It's not necessarily the power to get things done. It
all right,
is
okay,
the
okay,
ability to
okay.
influence others,
Yeah,
right?
so it's the
And
individual power.
it's individual, the ability to have and be satisfied. Some of that is external. Some of it, of the power motive, can be seen in artifacts like the corner office, the executive parking space, the rights and privileges of the senior person that are visible. Some people love that. Others just prefer the ability to run and operate something. Affiliation is very much about, I'm driven by that need to be with others and do things with others. And you're right, the achievement motive can limit the ability to affiliate. What I found at Mars was people got their affiliation needs met. It's a very social company. It's a
Yes,
very
okay, so yeah,
relationship-driven company. So it didn't need to be work-related.
yeah, okay,
The networks at Mars were terribly important. When I first got there, they said the most important thing you'll do in your first year is meet people.
right, okay. So
Who
how
you
did
knew was
you then
important.
take? Okay, so now you discover that it's about the individual. So how do you then leverage, use whatever word you want to use, to actually get from the individual motivation to the collaboration?
Right. So again, the trick is, how do I make collaboration feel like something to be achieved? Think about the elements of what we do to drive individual achievement. We think about things like SMART goals, right? We know that a goal isn't helpful unless it's clear, right? It's specific, it's
Yes.
measurable, you can act on it, right? It's time bound. So we had to first look at the work of the team and ask, what, to your point earlier, what actually is teamwork and what isn't? That's a foundational question. And by the way, I don't even bother with the word team. What I found was, at Mars, I would say to someone, well, yes, this is your team, but it's not really a team. I got a lot of angry people.
Right.
Of course it's a team. This is my team, and it's a great team, and we have great team spirit. Okay, you're fine. You're a team.
Okay.
Well, let's look then at the work. What actually requires collaboration and what doesn't, right? Because let's face it, great individuals doing great work by themselves can do great things for a company. But as Richard Hackman, the Harvard professor, I think now says, teamwork can work magic, but not all work is teamwork. So we have to have that. But you also need a filter. How do I know what's teamwork and what's not? This is where I take teams through an exercise in defining their value-adding collaborative purpose. What is the value our collaboration can create over and above just the sum of our individual efforts? What is it we think our collaboration can bring that will take our performance incrementally higher as a team? Then which pieces of work fit into that? So what I'm doing here is I'm creating what I just call clarity. I'm creating clarity around what is important, who needs to be involved and who doesn't, so that we can create collaborative accountability. So let's say, here's a further piece of information. I don't just ask a team which work requires collaboration and which doesn't. I ask them, which work requires collaboration of subsets of the team. So it's a three-tier thing.
Yeah.
Total team, subsets, individual. Let's figure out what sits where. That stuff I call this thing the radar screen. So at the center of the radar screen is the total teamwork. And frankly, it shouldn't be all that much. It's teamwork, real collaboration. Again, is time consuming. It's expensive because all those salaries are focusing on the work there. What are the few things we're going to collaborate on? Then let's make some agreements about how we're going to do that. That second ring out on my radar screen, the subsets or the subgroups. If you and I have a project together, John, you and I then will be tasked by the boss to sit down and say, okay, it's project XYZ. John, you're good at this. You're going to handle this. I love doing this kind of work. I'm really good at it. I'll take this bit. I commit to get this to you by then if you commit to do that for me. We contract for our collaboration and we make it accountable. That's the secret to tapping into individual motivation, is creating enough clarity around the collaborative commitments that you can in fact commit to them, and be held accountable for them.
Yeah. I'm interested in going back because you said there earlier on that, you know, an awful lot of the money that organizations have invested in team development has been wasted. And I'm just curious because one of the things that, because one of the things that I always say if I'm going to work with clients, I mean, if, you know, people say, okay, well, maybe we could all go together and, you know, do, you know, whitewater rafting or climb a mountain. I would say, well, fine, okay, but if you're going to do that, that's not me. Firstly, you're talking to the wrong person, right? Because I ain't going to do that because I don't believe in it. You might have a great day out. I'm not denying that it'll be great fun, but it's not going to make it into a team.
Here, here.
So I'm just curious, what are the other things that you've seen organizations pump big money into that you kind of think, listen, that just doesn't work?
Look, let's go back to the 4 stages for a second. This is a bugbear for me. There was a piece of work done by I tend to look at journals and stuff quite a bit, by a lady named Gersick. Connie Gersick was her name. She was at Yale working for Richard Hackman at the time, and she tried to prove out the 4 stages of team development. And she wrote a paper on this, and what she found was, okay, maybe there are 2. There's a forming stage. I got it. We're all coming together. We don't know each other. We'll be very polite and nice. Then there's this storming part where we start to get to know ourselves and the work and the pressures mount. After that, she said, every team I studied went different directions. Some stayed there. Some went to performing. She said, there's no predictability. Now, speaking to another professor friend of mine, that piece of work hasn't been replicated yet. But this other guy, this Professor Matt Cronin at where is he? George Mason University in Virginia, says there's nothing about the 4 stages that really is valid in the workplace. This is my assertion. Matt supports me in it, but let me put it this way. At Mars, teams never got out of stage 1 or stage 2. Why? The theory says that when there's a change in personnel, a change in leadership, a change in strategy, that you go back to stage 1, right? That's what Tuckman would argue, right? Yeah. There was always a change in Mars. There's always, in big corporations, especially today, change is constant. There's no stability around the people, right? And even around strategies, which now, I mean, in my day, it was you do a 3 to 5 year strategy, and that's going to carry it. You can't do a strategy 6 months out anymore without it getting disrupted.
Well, so yeah, because I mean, I think that's true. And I think also, if you go back to COVID, just to prove your point, there's no strategy that was written pre-COVID that has withstood that 100%. I mean, elements would have, but I mean, I think it just proved the point that you've got to make strategy organic and you've got to make it dynamic. Right?
Yeah, it has to be. It has to be now.
To do that. But sorry, I'm bringing it back to the team thing. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, the other point about Tuckman was, and this is important, few people realize that Tuckman's study was done based on a literature review of 50 articles about therapy groups. Mm-hmm. So I've studied in my field. We know what therapy groups are. We actually use similar methodologies when we do some group work based on honest conversations with each other. But in my experience, I never met a corporate team that was anything like a therapy group. I mean, right? Therapy groups don't have numbers they got to meet. They don't have to hit the quarterly number. They don't have to hit the net sales number for the year. They don't have to worry about economic profit or tick on down the list. They don't. They're operating under totally different sets of circumstances.
And they don't have a hierarchy.
They don't have a hierarchy. They're not paid to be in those chairs. They're paying to be there. And yet we took this thing from the 1960s, Well, and look, it was brilliant in its day. It opened up a lot of possibilities in the space of team development. So I stand on the shoulders of a giant when it comes to Bruce Tuckman. But its validity in the workspace just didn't hold up. I was seeing it. I didn't know what I was seeing, John, but I was seeing the ineffectiveness of it.
Yeah.
And academia and just common sense finally mounted up and said, that's just not going to help you. People use the language quite freely. People say, oh, our team's only been together about 6 months. We're in this storming stage.
Yeah, I
And
know.
that's
Yeah,
fine, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's good. That's probably an accurate assessment.
yeah.
But beyond that, it doesn't help teams know what to do.
Yeah, you say that you believe that Mars kind of cracked the code on high performance collaboration.
Yes, I
When you
say that.
say that, what is their code?
Well, the cracking of the code was this idea of individual motivation leading to better collaboration. That was the insight that unlocked stuff for Mars. Where I could see after another 2 years of applying this, I was having people call me and say, we're up 30% over last year. Our retention numbers are better. We are now viewed more positively by those who report into us because our message is so clear and consistent, because we've gotten so clear about who we are and what we do as a team. I started to hear back the kinds of stuff that told me, yes, this is working. What's more, and I've got an example right now. I had a contract with a team that started in September, and I told them right up front, I said, my goal is to not be taking money from you next spring, because you'll have gotten good at doing the things you and I are going to work on together. And the last meeting I attended with them, I attended at their invitation, was in February. I was there to facilitate. They didn't need me.
Yeah,
they had such clarity of intent. They were so focused on what needed to be done. The next day we said, you know what, we're good for now. Yeah. We're going to do a big virtual offsite in a couple of months. We'll see you then.
Yeah, but when I just started thinking through, I mean, you're talking about, okay, deciding which is in which circle, and the team, there's the kind of the collaboration, and there's the individual.
Yeah,
that's kind of the process of doing it. How do you create the culture of collaboration?
This is a leadership matter, right? So the last chapter in the book I wrote recently, the one that came out in the middle of the pandemic, the last chapter is all about what does it take to lead a team using these precepts. So to create the culture, first of all, it's about shifting away from hierarchy towards higher levels of involvement. Right. So if you're working in an organization, I've had this issue when I take this methodology into a more structured pharma company, for example, where the hierarchy is really important to people. Their titles matter and so forth. If you're going to change that culture, you need to begin. This is, I'm pausing because I used to be a big top-down kind of guy. I thought when I was doing my consulting work at IBM, it was all about, I'm going to influence these top leaders so that they can then drive that change throughout the organization from the top. Then I went through a phase where I was like, you know what, that's just baloney. I've seen great stuff happen from the middle of the organization and then spread out as networks and the internet and intranets started to unfold, and you could reach people you couldn't reach before by virtue of technology. I said, you know what, it's got to be middle out or even bottom up, sort of my contrarian nature. But when it comes to this sort of thing, it almost has to be top down, because you have to start to dismantle the hierarchy. You can have it on your org charts. And by the way, Mars is a fairly flat organization. So this thing came out of a culture of egalitarianism. Yeah. And so it tends to prosper more in cultures where we set our titles aside and we can come together as a team of equals. Yes, I'm the boss, but we're all in this together. So it's about leadership, and it's about being willing to let go of the need to control. Because look, when you have this conversation about what requires collaboration and what doesn't, you could sit there at the head of the conference table and you could make mandates. This project is everybody. This project is these two people. This project is just you. we know one of the things we know about people is they need choice. They need to feel like they have agency, like like they matter and their opinion matters. If you're not able to create a culture where you can open the conversation up and flatten the organization, even if just for the sake of teamwork, you may want to retain the hierarchy for a lot of other good reasons, a lot of control reasons, right? Financial control reasons and things, compliance. But the culture shift has to happen at the top as we begin to find ways to flex the hierarchy so that it can be a more involving culture.
Yeah. It's just right. I just finished. I don't know if you read or not. I just finished reading Gary Hamel's latest book, Humanocracy. And
I know I've have it on a
yeah,
sticky note on my desk here.
yeah,
Actually, I haven't
and
gotten to it yet.
it's really interesting. And the point he's making was that, I mean, again, going back when we talk about bureaucratic structures, I mean, bureaucratic structures were perfectly valid because when we were shifting from a time where we were going from despotism to bureaucracy, that was
Right,
improvement. But
right.
now we actually need to go much more towards the human side, and really look at how we are, utilizing and optimizing the people that we have in the organization instead of looking at the bureaucratic structure. So I think it's very much kind of to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something that I'm just really curious about, and it's something I'm always fascinated about.
Mm,
We talk in teams, and the team has got its own defined culture and its own defined
mm,
way of doing things.
yes.
Then we're actually bringing somebody else in, and there's this conversation about, well, do they fit, right? Do they actually
Mm,
fit into this team? And
mm,
there's kind of two competing thoughts in my head, right? One is sometimes we can, I think fit is important, right? But sometimes we actually can say that fit means being like the rest of us, or we're all alike,
yes.
right?
Right.
Which is a danger, right? So how do you balance those two things? That is, okay, it's about getting the diversity because the diversity is going to improve the team, and getting the fit.
Yeah, so this is such a complex and interesting area, because I'm working with a group that's the diversity and inclusion group at a company right now. Um, so it's on my mind a lot, this idea of difference helps us be stronger, right? Our
Yeah.
differences, a couple of things. One, my friend Matt Cronin will tell you that yes, diversity is um, theoretically, philosophically important, but it actually tends to slow things down, and it can often lead to as much conflict as it does to creativity. So it's not a given that diversity will make us better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important, because just cramming diversity into a group that doesn't understand how to make the most of it is going to backfire on you.
Yeah, and it becomes tokenism.
It does, and that breeds
Yeah,
cynicism, and
yeah,
that's not good.
absolutely. Yeah.
So here's where I've been thinking about this. We want difference in the team, and we have to learn as a team how to work with difference. That's one of the first things we have to say. It's not so there are two sides to this. So as a team, and we use the word tolerance for a long time. We have to be tolerant. We have to be more than tolerant in a diverse team. We have to really embrace difference and say, I get that John's different. I get that Carlos is different. I may not want to have lunch with Carlos. He has certain cultural ways of being that I'm not comfortable with, but he's got a great mind, and he knows his role, and he can contribute. I respect him. I think I saw that on your website, a
Yes.
discussion
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah.
If we can establish respect for other, regardless of difference, it's a great first step. We may not get trust right away,
Mm.
but we have to start, I think, with respect. So I think there's a job that the leader and the team have to do to very consciously prepare themselves to bring in difference, right? Because you're right. If we hire the same old, we'll only ever get the same old, same old.
Mm.
I do believe in fit. I absolutely think it's a real thing. Cultural fit at the organizational level, as
That's
well
right.
as within a team. But so I think you bring in people who don't necessarily fit whatever I don't know how to explain this, but the team climate, right, may not be for everybody, and that's okay. Now, the other side of this, so we got the team thinking about, well, what is our climate and how can we be built to embrace difference? Then I come into a team where, and this was true at Mars, I was not a good fit. I was not a good fit. In fact, I would argue that in my 18 years, almost 18 years there, I was never a good fit. But I recognized it was on me to find a niche.
Right.
Right. I needed to, so there's an individual responsibility aspect to this. And look, I have to be careful here. If I'm a woman of color in an American business that is largely white male dominated, not an unusual circumstance, right? We have that, unfortunately, sometimes tokenism going on. Or even if we hire because this person is just the most qualified and they're the best, and they come in as a woman of color and they're in this white male dominated environment, it can be very hard to find a niche.
Absolutely.
You can feel very much the outsider, and very uncomfortable just by virtue of the fact that you are who you are in that kind of organization. So I don't want to make it sound like it's easy to do this, to find a niche, to find a way to fit in. I'm a tall white guy. It was easier for me to find a way to fit in because at least I looked and sounded like the people around me, right? But I do think, and I'm working on a paper on this actually, John. How can we help? This is in the topic of psychological safety.
Yes, very much so.
Right? The courage to be different, the courage to hold your difference, and to find ways to build bridges. Yes, your boss, your manager needs to create an environment as much as possible of psychological safety, but what can I do? That question hasn't yet been answered as far as I can determine, and I'm really excited about maybe partnering with one of my professor friends on this. What can we do to, maybe in the past we would have talked about it as resilience, but to me that's more of a change management thing. This is more about how do I build my own inner psychological safety, if you will.
Yeah. Well, when you have the paper, I will look forward to actually seeing a copy of that because I think it's a fascinating area. I really do think it's a fascinating area. And I think we still have an awful lot to discover about how we actually really make that work and understanding fit and getting it right rather than actually describing it the wrong way as well. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, when you say describing it the wrong way, what do you mean?
Well, I often hear people talk about that fit, okay, well, you got to fit in because, it can be a boys club. So you got to fit into the boys club.
Yeah, right.
Right. And that's where it becomes very negative and very damaging. Right.
Yeah.
Not only to the person coming in, but actually to everybody else.
Yes.
Because it makes a very unattractive team to join. To join. Carlos, we could go on talking for a long time, and I've actually gone past the time that I said I would keep you. So my apologies for that. But it's been a great conversation, and we really should come back and do another one because there's a lot of content in here that we haven't even touched that I want to go on. But listen, before we wrap up for today, 2 questions I ask everybody: a book other than your own that's had a significant impact. What's the book and which one? I'm sure looking behind you there at one of your bookshelves, I'm sure it's kind of saying, well, which one do I pick?
I've pared it down. I moved recently. We had to go through it. And I've only kept the ones that have shaped me. I have to go back to the first book I ever read that opened my eyes to the possibilities of what I could do in organizations. And that was Peter Senge's Fifth Discipline.
Oh, yeah. Super.
A life-changing book.
Yeah.
It's back there. My first edition is back there. Someday, it might be worth something, but to me, that has to be it. That was the seminal. And there are others we could talk about, but that's for the next time.
The other question is about daily habits, because one of the things that I know from talking and reading about successful people and talking to successful people is that they all have rituals. They all have daily rituals. Now they're different and they come in all shapes and sizes. But I'm just curious what yours are.
Well, for a long time I taught yoga. I was a yoga instructor for years, and they come out of that practice. Every morning, I have 2 to 5 minutes of just doing breathing exercises, what the yogis call pranayama. And that is followed by a gratitude meditation of 2 to 5 minutes. And finally, then I just finished working. I have an oak. When I studied martial arts years ago, we did a lot of Zen meditation. And so I built myself an oak meditation bench. And so I will meditate for 10 to 20 minutes.
Excellent. Do that every day.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Sets you up for the day.
It does. It keeps me from going a little crazy. Remember I said I didn't fit at Mars? I've got this slightly manic edge, and I've just learned how to make friends with it. And
That's
keep
great. I
it
love
keep
that.
it
I love
happy.
that.
And
That's really interesting. Carlos, where can people get in touch with you? We will put it in the show notes, but where can they get in touch with you if they're listening right now?
right, carlosvdapena.com. My name, so Carlos V for ValdesDapena.com. I'm on LinkedIn under Carlos Valdes Dapena and also out on Facebook under the same name.
So they will find you there.
They will find me there.
Yeah, well, your name is much easier to find on LinkedIn than mine. Start looking for John Murphy.
John Murphy.
So
I was thinking that one of my best friends at Mars was a guy named John Murphy. I thought,
yeah.
oh, wow. Yeah.
Well, my parents weren't blessed with any creativity. So
it's a good, solid Irish name, John. You should be proud of it.
I am. Carlos, thank you so much for doing this. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. I look forward to having you back on again.
You are welcome. I look forward to that too. Have a good rest of your day.